Well, here we are. We Build Houses Incorporated, a residential development company. We have now got everything resolved with the state of Arizona, and a little bit of a mistake on the mailing with the stuff, and it flagged us as potentially something wrong. And I talked to them specifically, and everything went okay. So we now have gone into a shareholders agreement. We started off with the founders agreement, which I've made a video with that already. You could look at that. But now, because we're an official corporation now, we've felt the requirement to go into the shareholders agreement, which supersedes it, basically, the founders agreement. Within the shareholders agreement, it delineates the percentage of ownership that each of the people or companies or individuals that are a part of this company, it delineates what their percentage of ownership is. And there's other stuff that's incorporated into it also, like the governance of the company. How will it operate? Who's going to make decisions? Again, it's akin to the founders agreement, but it's a separate one. How disputes are handled, within the shareholders agreement. These are the things that are delineated that tells each of the shareholders what would happen if something happened. Like our preferred method would be arbitration, for example, if there's a legal misunderstanding or something to that effect. But I don't see that happening. Our company, we are what's considered a closely held corporation. It means that we're not trading our stocks out on the New York Stock Exchange, for example, or a penny stock or anything like that. We're not out looking to sell our stock, for example, to just the general public or anybody that's out there. In fact, if anybody ever wanted to potentially try to buy into our company, they would just buy the shares within the company that we have set up for that. And then they would stay pretty much within that closely held corporation again. It isn't like you can sell and buy and sell our stock. That's not the way our company's set up. Again, that's what's considered a closely held company, a closely held corporation. Our ownership percentages are split up amongst two different types of shares that we have. One is a common and one is a preferred stock. We have 4 million shares issued of the common stock, and the common stock has voting rights basically within the company. Everybody can have a vote on what's going on. It votes in the board of directors. The board of directors then votes in the president of the board, and the shareholders have a vote in that also. So, and we have another set of stock that's called a preferred stock. Well, those don't get an opportunity to vote, but our stock are set up as convertible preferred. I know it sounds complicated, but it's really not. Convertible preferred means that the stock that can't vote, we can convert that over to a stock that will be able to vote. And those are set up to where if we allow somebody else to come into our tight little network in our company, that more than likely those are the shares they're going to initially get, so that somebody just can't come in and take over our company and have voting rights and everything right off the bat. That's something that you want to walk into somebody with versus just headlong and let you buy a bunch of stock and take over the company. I think they call that a hostile takeover. But this kind of is a way that it prevents it. And then through metrics or things that are milestones, for example, some of those shares then can convert over to be where they are voting share stocks. It also, within the shareholders agreement, it also has in there the dividend policies. And everybody loves that. Everybody likes to get paid. So there's where the dividend policies come into effect, meaning like how is a company going to issue out the monies that we get in as profits? For example, how often is that going to happen also? Are we going to give the profits as a dividend to the shareholders? Are we going to hold some of those profits in the company to buy, capital improvement on items or stuff, or help us operate? These are the decisions that are made within those dividend policies. And then also within the dividend policy, it has a provision that's set up in there to where you can borrow against the shares of your stock, and loans are tax-free. So to those double tax people on C Corps, that's, if you don't know the rules of the game, man, I can't help you. So our shares also have in the dividend in our shareholders agreement how often that we can transfer the stock. For example, ours is set up to where it is based upon what's called a capital event, meaning that if we go to borrow money or if we go to sell something really big or something to where there's a lot of movement, a capital event, then we can then offer those shares for sale or buy back shares or whatever during, so that it isn't just something that can happen at any given moment. You know, it has to be set upon some sort of a milestone, for example. For example, if somebody wanted to buy into our company, that's considered a capital event. And so then shareholders within the company could either sell, or we can, again, convert those preferred shares over, or however we wanted to do it. It's spelled out in there. So also with our shares, and if buying and selling in shares, there's also in our shareholders agreement stuff like first right of refusal, meaning that if shares came up for sale, well, one of the existing shareholders has the opportunity to buy that person out first before anybody outside, so to speak, can come in. So, for example, if one of the shareholders wants to sell theirs, the other shareholders have an opportunity to buy it first. There's also a tag-along provision within our shareholders agreement. And what that means is, like, if one of the major shareholders decides that I'm going to sell out at this amount, X amount, that all the other shareholders in there can also tag along with that sale and sell their shares also at that exact price, you know, that it's being sold at. And with that, there's also what's called a drag-along provision, where you drag the minors, you know, over the minor shareholders into a sale, you know, specifically, especially if they're in the preferred stock, you know, where they don't have a voting right on it. You know, it's just everybody gets sold, because sometimes another company will come in and they want to buy just a whole kit and caboodle, you know. And so there's these provisions that are considered exit strategies, to where the shares, it just tells everybody in advance what would happen or could happen in your shareholders agreement. There's also another provision within shareholders agreements called a shotgun provision. Basically, if I offer you a price for your shares and you say no, then you also have a right to buy mine at that same price. So basically, you know, so there's also other stuff you could do with the shares in there. There's stock option plays that you could do, as far as like to bring in people, for example, you know, and those can have metrics on them also, like milestones that you have to hit. For example, if we was to bring in a brand new project manager or sales guy, for an example, well, we could offer him as a part of the package for him is we'll give you shares to the company, right? Well, they're options up until the point that you hit a certain metrics, and then you can exercise those options on so many shares. Let's say, for example, it's a sales guy, and I'm asking the sales guy, go out and find us $500,000 in XYZ properties. And he goes out and he finds only $250,000 of it. Well, then he can only exercise 50% of the options for that particular thing that we're offering him as an incentive to come on and do those things. So it isn't like you just dump stuff on people right off the bat. You know, you want to be able to walk people into things. Within a company, it's like a marriage, you know. If you don't get along with each other, you got to have, this is your prenuptial agreement, so to speak. So there's other stuff that goes along with that, and I don't want to get too deep into, you know, the stock portions of how to operate into a company. I can make a whole video on that practically. But I wanted to make something at least to introduce what a C corporation is and how it's held, you know, and how the ownership is held and how things are transpiring through these actions. And again, like I say, if you got a complaint about double taxation, and that comes from the corporation gets taxed at 21, I understand, and then the pays for payroll are also taxed at your ordinary income rate as a W-2. But again, if you don't know the rules of the game, I can't explain it to you. So I hope this helps. I'm going to make other videos. See you later.